This video is going to go over how we can look at the change in the price of a good, and in particular then how we can break this down into two different parts, an income effect and a substitution effect. I started here with an income with a budget line indifference curve diagram drawn out to show, in this case I'm going to do an increase in the price of X. In my notes that I have for this, I will go over a decrease in the price of X, and that's what I went over in class. So here I'm going to show an increase in the price of X, so this will be a little bit different than the diagram in the notes. But here we say we're going to have a change in the price of X holding the price of Y and income constant. So the good here, the budget line here is going to be pivoting anchored along the Y-axis, so we know that this is a change in the price of X. The budget line initially is BL1, it goes to BL2, so that's a shifting in of the budget line, so this is an increase in the price of X. And I've drawn in already the tangency points with the original budget line, BL1, and that's going to give us a quantity of X of X1. And then for the new budget line, BL2, the tangency point giving us a quantity of X of X2. So this would be the change in quantity demanded that we would observe in response to the increase in the price of X. Now, when we think about this, there's actually two things going on here. Although the price of X has gone up, two things have actually happened. One is the slope of the budget line has changed. The slope of the budget line is the ratio of the price of X over the price of Y. So it's the price ratio. Because the price of X has changed, the slope of the budget line has changed, the relative prices have changed. So people are adjusting their behavior. One of the things they're adjusting to is a change in relative prices. The other thing that happened is that because the price of X goes up, if you were to think about, well, what is the consumer price index that this consumer would face in this case? A consumer price index is really sort of a weighted average of prices. And so you have weights on those, and then those represent the weights in this weighted average reflect budget shares. But most significantly, if the price, so the price index would be a function of the price of X plus the price of Y with weights on them. If the price of X goes up and there's no change in the price of Y, that price index for this economy, for this simple too-good economy, will be higher. Real income is your nominal income, your income in dollars, divided by the price index. So when the price index goes up, people's real incomes have gone down. So the second thing we can look at that's being captured here in the movement from X1 to X2 would be the effect of this person's real income being lower. So one is, there's two effects here, and just as the names are hinting at, one is a change in relative prices. And that will lead people to substitute one good for the other. And then the other is the change in their real income due to the price change. Since we have an increase in the price of X, real income ends up falling, and that's part of what's going on here. So to do this, we want to figure out how we could break this down to hold real income constant. Well, real income is actually going to be very kind of hard to see in a diagram like this. There's a way we can do it that's far easier to see graphically, and that is to say, well, suppose you suppose you just have utility levels, not income, and because ultimately that's what people care about. They care about utility, not income. Income in some ways is just a way for us to get utility. So what we can do is think about drawing a budget line. We're going to draw a third budget line in here. It's going to be parallel to BL2. So it's going to reflect the new prices, the change in prices, but give the consumer the same level of utility as they had before the price change. So I'm drawing BL3 is going to be parallel to BL2, so it's going to be steeper than BL1, and it's going to be tangent to U1. That's going to give us a tangency point here somewhere up in here. So that's BL3. And remember, BL3, the budget line you're drawing in here, has the same slope as the budget line after the price change, but it's going to put the consumer on the same level of utility that they had on the indifference curve that they had when they were maximizing utility prior to the price change. So that's the way, sort of graphically, to break down these two components. And so we'll have a tangency point here to the along U1 and BL3. This tangency point has to be up and to the left of our initial tangency point, because BL3 is steeper. The price of x has gone up. Remember, the price, the slope is px over py. So as the price of x is in the numerator, price of x goes up, the budget line gets steeper. That means we have to have a tangency point up and to the left along at U1. That's going to be there. Allow us to come down here and designate an x3. And so then what we can see is x1 to x3 is going to be the substitution effect. And then x3 to x2 is the income effect. And when we add those two together, then we get the overall change in quantity demanded that we would have seen, going back to after you introduce demand curves and talk about a change in quantity demanded. X1 to X2 is the change in quantity demanded that we would see. It's the amount at which this person going to adjust their consumption of good X in response to the price change. But we can break that down into two parts: a substitution effect and an income effect. The substitution effect is always going to be in the opposite direction of the change in price. So we have an increase in the change of price here, or we have an increase in the price of X. The price of X goes up, and the substitution effect, therefore, says that we're going to have a reduction in the amount of X consumed. If this was if I was showing a decrease in the price of X, then the substitution effect would be positive, an increase in the amount of X that you consume. So the substitution effect is always in the opposite direction of the price change. Now, one way to think about that is that as the prices change, when X becomes more expensive, X becomes a less effective way to purchase utility. So when the price of X goes up, all of a sudden on the margin, it's now more efficient to produce utility by buying good Y instead of a good X. And so you're going to substitute. If the price of X goes down, X is now a more efficient way to produce utility, if you want to think of it that way, as opposed to like of consumption. So you consume more X when the price goes down. The income effect depends on whether this is a normal or an inferior good. In this case, we have a normal good because the price of X goes up, so it's a decrease in real income. So reflecting BL3 and BL2, you can see the budget lines shifting toward the origin here, and so therefore BL2 has a lower income than BL3, or there's a decrease in real income. And we see that the income effect goes from X3 to X2. That's a decrease in the amount of X consumed. So this must be a normal good. Normal good is one where when your income goes up, you buy more. When your income goes down, you buy less. There's a decrease in real income, and the person's buying less of good X. So this is a normal good. In the book, it's I think figure 3.6. They show the effect of this with a they draw this out when the good X is an inferior good. In that case, when you have an inferior good, the income and substitution effects will go in the opposite direction. So here you see the substitution effect was to reduce the amount of X that the person consumes, and then the income effect also reduced the amount of X. But that's only for a normal good. If you have an inferior good, the income effect will actually be in the opposite direction of the substitution effect. So for a normal good, the income effect adds to or builds on or supplements the substitution effect. For an inferior good, the income effect actually cancels out or offsets part of the substitution effect. And then in the book, they talk about what's known as a Giffen good. A Giffen good would be the case, I said, like, well, suppose you had an inferior good and you ended up with a really big income effect. Since the substitution and income effects move in opposite direction, if you had an inferior good and it had a really, really strong, really big income effect, it's conceivable, it's possible. Logic, sort of, there doesn't seem to be any violation here to think about what a good having such a, being an inferior good and having such a big income effect that the income effect could offset being larger than the substitution effect. If that would happen, then we'd have something that would be really weird. We'd have a violation of the law of demand, because the law of demand would say that price and quantity demanded are inversely related. So when the price of X goes up, the quantity of X demanded goes down. But if you had an inferior good and the income effect was going in the opposite direction and it was big enough, you could actually see a violation of the law of demand. The price of a good could go up, and a person could end up buying more of it because it's just this really strong inferior good. And when the price of the good goes up, the person's real income has fallen enough that, well, they have to buy more of the good. So their real income's gone down enough that they have to buy more of the good. This is what's known as the Giffen paradox, or a Giffen good, because 19th century English economist Robert Giffen was the first one to propose, like, well, this could actually, maybe this could happen. There's been a lot of research and a number of studies over the years trying to identify if there ever have been any Giffen goods. As far as we know, it's not clear that there's ever been an actual real world case of the Giffen paradox. The reason for that in the world is that, well, here we have a two good framework, and in the two good framework, it might sort of make sense that, it looks like, oh, you have an inferior good and a very strongly inferior good, and then, with two goods, the price change for one of the goods is a pretty big portion of the CPI, so a big price change for one of them, maybe could induce a very strong income effect. But in a world in which you buy dozens or hundreds of goods, a price change from any one of them is going to cause just a much, much smaller, a very small change in your real income. I mean, something would have to be a big part of your income for that a price change there to be pretty significant, to cause a pretty significant income effect. So it's not clear there ever was a case of Giffen goods. Probably the best one is, to my knowledge, is some people have argued that maybe potatoes in Ireland during the famous potato famine in the 1800s may have been a Giffen good. That poor Irish people normally ate like a lot of potatoes and then like some cabbage or corned beef, and then like when there was a potato crop. The potato crop failed, the price of potatoes went up, but this meant that the poor families in Ireland had to actually stop buying any corned beef or cabbage, and they just had to rely pretty much completely on potatoes. It's unclear if that was true. It's in some sense just largely a curiosity, but it is a possibility, and it's worth mentioning here. So this is how we would break down the effect of a price change, which we normally observe with the demand curve, into these two effects, an income effect and a substitution effect.